Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Matthew and I are really excited to be here and share with you a project that we've been working on for what, Matthew, a little over a year now, I guess.
Correct. Yep.
And we are just pretty much at the end of design development, and we were sort of talking at the beginning of this. It's the first time that we've put a show together that describes the entire process from soup to nuts throughout the entire design development phase. So. What we're here to share with you is a project that was delivered through a progressive design build process with the UC San Diego, a client of ours who is building a living and learning neighborhood, another of them, and we'll tell you a little bit about what that means in a moment. The design build team is made up of Kitchell Construction, HKS Architects, EYRC Architects, and SWA Landscape Architects. This was a picture taken right after we did the presentation during the competition.
Before we knew we won.
Before we knew, we were still happy and hopeful at that point. We still are.
That's right, yeah.
So we want to talk a little bit about the project, but first frame it within the question of why a living and learning neighborhood. This may be a term that's not completely, or maybe new to some of you. Within the higher ed, especially campuses, this is a type of a project that is often used, but it's almost exclusively used at the UC San Diego campus. And the reason is because it's addressing a very real social and a need among students and needing a place in a large campus setting to have a home or a place of belonging that is relatable to them as they come on campus. Many of these students are away from home for the first time. Sometimes it's the first time they've ever had a roommate or had to live or deal with someone as a roommate. And so what they've done is broken their campus into what they call living and learning neighborhoods. And you can see the sort of string of pearls that runs along North Torrey Pines Road in La Jolla, California. So the UC University is generally in this location. You can see, if those of you who haven't been there, it's very close to the ocean. It's on a bluff. The ridge is running right through here, right down the center of campus. And the new college that we're calling the Theater District is at the very southern end of this group of campuses. So a living and learning neighborhood is basically a neighborhood that's a mixed-use community, mixing up living and learning program elements into a single community within a college university campus. The reason being, and we have some stats here as to why neighborhoods are necessary, 63% of students felt lonely in the past year, and this is across all university systems. 10% of students felt were experiencing homelessness, interestingly enough, even while they're in school. 37% reported as being overweight or obese, indicating that we have very real wellness and health issues. And also 8% of students and adolescents experience an anxiety disorder before age 21. And actually on UC San Diego's campus, you'll find that statistic is even higher. Interestingly enough, with all of these things that we're talking about, this is happening during a time of life, the ages between 18, 25 generally, which are critical brain development years. So brain health is a really important issue. And what we find is that these issues of loneliness and anxiety really do affect health in significant ways. Loneliness increases the risk of death by 26% statistically. Social isolation increases death by the risk by 29%. Living alone increases death by a risk of 32%, sorry. And then being socially disconnected increases the death rate by 50%. So what we're seeing specifically at UC San Diego is the anxiety disorder percentage is that 25% of students arriving on campus in their freshman year have a diagnosed anxiety or mental health issue. So
with numbers like these, I mean, you really can get the sense that it's mission critical for a project like this to succeed, you know, for the well-being of the students.
Right, and that's why we look at these institutions, because we're designing a residential neighborhood basically for 2,000 beds, right? Who are the people that we're designing to? And the university states that these are really critical statistics and needs that we need to deal with when we're creating neighborhoods that will be successful. In addition to the anxiety and health disorders that I'm talking about, students, many of them work. Some of them are older, going to school later in life. Some of them have children. Some of them obviously have income issues. There's at UC San Diego, and again, these are all UC San Diego statistics, 60% of the students coming are of color, which is higher than the national average. And again, I mentioned the 25% with documented anxiety disorders. So these statistics become really important, especially when you put them into the broader notion of things that we wrestle with in society: housing insecurity, food insecurity, physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, veterans, students with children, and many underrepresented minority groups. So we'll tell you just a little bit more about the neighborhood and then talk about the process that we're using to design it in a way that addresses some of these issues.
Yeah, so with that as a backdrop, the program that the university put forward for the competition for the Theater District Living and Learning Project then was about almost an 11-acre site. Underground parking needs to accommodate 1,200 vehicles. Needs to have 2,000 residential beds in a mixture of suite types. About 30,000 square foot of academic and classroom space, and that includes a 480-seat auditorium. Another important part of the project, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, was about 33,000 square feet of retail, and how this project really needs to interface with the community and become a retail hub that ties in with the existing theater district. Targeting LEED Gold, and then a desire to hit a minimum energy use intensity of 25.1.
So I was mentioning with the stats that we were talking about, the design team is very user-based and very focused on outcomes and wanting to design in a way that we were addressing these issues head on with a community that could help address them in a way that would lead to higher and better outcomes for the students. I didn't mention earlier that someone would say there are two architectural firms and a landscape architectural firm on this project. The way the team was set up during the during the competition and continued through the design processes, we operated completely as an integrated studio among offices. So from the user standpoint or from a client standpoint, it was never apparent to them in any way that the projects were divided in any way, that all design decisions were made in a corporate and a deliberate sort of collaborative way. Over the course of development, each firm took on areas of responsibility for further development in a way that was consistently updating the entire design team and getting input in that regard. So we've operated as a very integrated and integral team throughout the process. So our process was outcome driven, as I mentioned. So we were fortunate enough, because it's a progressive design build delivery system, to be brought on at the beginning during the programming stage. So our programming started with intensive user workshops, during which two signature outcomes were identified by the users. And those were a focus on student health and wellness, and also a focus on connecting to community. And you can see that both of those are tied very strongly to the data that we told you about earlier. Our research team did a pretty in-depth literature research review on all related subjects that we've talked about and related to residential living experiences. And we also did pretty extensive user experience on-site research, primary research, and we'll show you a little bit about that, through various different types of focus groups, interviews, mapping, observations, and photo documentaries. And from that, we learned several insights that have turned into design strategies that we are incorporating into the design that will help us deal with the desired outcomes that have been identified. So the first signature outcome, as I mentioned, was student well-being, which we've talked about already, and also a connection to community. What I want to mention here is that we were designed very carefully to the notion of community at different scales. The community in relationship to another person, to a group of people on a floor, in a unit, in the campus, across the entire university, in the community of La Jolla and beyond. So we're addressing community in many ways as it ties to socialization and meeting students' needs. And then when we went on campus through a series of exercises, one of them called developing end user personas, our research team, based on all of the research we've done, identified a group of personas that were representative of different characteristics, different user types with different types of issues to help keep us them in mind during our design process. So these were brought up during the design exercises, especially when we got into interior, to sort of remember, are we keeping Ali in mind? This is a person who has, for instance, a certain, well, I'm not going to pick one, but someone who might have a special need of some sort. So we're always trying to make sure that we're designing from these user point of views, and the user personas will help us during the design process to keep them in mind. They became, in a way, our sort of clients, if you will. We did a lot of behavior mapping, and for different reasons to develop and are looking at developing different types of outdoor locations, indoor locations, observing what was happening on campus, interviewing and finding what was successful and what wasn't, especially as it tied to outcomes desired around connecting to nature. You could see we did a lot of heat mapping relative to different types of activities related to connecting to nature and exercising. Again, from a health and wellness standpoint, we went to various locations on site that had direct relevance to what we were doing. And I won't get into too much detail, but we'll bring up some of those items again as we talk through the design strategies that were put in place.
So during the design competition and continuing on afterwards, we've really kind of anchored the project conceptually in this notion of exponential ecology. And the idea of ecology then is the relationship of an organism to its environment. And so for us, the idea of exponential ecology is then what sort of virtuous cycles can we create for the organisms, for the people that will inhabit the project? What sort of virtuous cycles can we create for them that will continue to create positive outcomes throughout their interaction in every aspect of their interaction with the project? And so this always became a real guiding principle for us in terms of whenever we were making a design decision, we were making sure that it was reinforcing other design decisions. Nothing was allowed to kind of exist as just in its own box. So as we began dealing with the site and starting to plan the project and how to accommodate these 2,000 beds of student housing along with all these other program pieces on this site, with these guiding principles of really maximizing connection to nature, the first move that we made would really conceive together with our landscape architect was this idea of restoring the natural drainage ecology of the site. And look at, it's currently a giant asphalt parking lot that serves the theater district and some of the other faculty and staff parking needs. But if we were to look at that and restore the normal drainage ecology to that, as we move stormwater across the site, how might that create an organizational idea to organize the buildings around? So you kind of see that diagram there on the left showing the idea of the ramble, this natural sort of storm drainage that would move through. And so we use that to allow that to carve the project in the north-south direction and allow the bars of the buildings to be sort of bifurcated by that dry creek bed type element. And then by doing so, it also started to create a number of outdoor rooms that we felt could have unique kind of characters to them. The wellness corridor, the scholars cloister, the bamboo forest, the picnic, the marketplace, and you'll see more about those as we go. If you want to go next. And then continuing to build on this idea of allowing the environment to inform the building geometry and organization, and knowing the sustainability and energy use intensity targets that we had, we really wanted to figure out how to make these buildings naturally ventilated and how do we optimize the building geometry to allow for that. So looking at the predominant westerly winds coming off the water, looking at the natural topography and canyons that exist that kind of help funnel those wind currents as they come up to the site. We then allowed the wind to carve the project in the east-west direction and to turn the buildings and shift their orientations in a way to help capture that wind and then also to help capture views. So there was a number of view studies that we did and parametric tests that we did to optimize the massings of the buildings to optimize not only for natural ventilation, but optimize for view opportunities from the student rooms. Next. So you see this more developed site plan here then with the building bars kind of running east-west, really putting the dominant solar orientations facing north and south. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the facade design and the crenellations that we created on the lower portions of the elevations to optimize wind flow and improve opportunities for natural ventilation. And you start to see the ramble in the form of the the sort of green tree belt line running through the project, and then the clear outdoor rooms and the different characters those take on in between them. And as much as this is as this is a living and learning neighborhood, it's not just housing for the 2,000 beds, but it also is an academic cluster, which is kind of that northeasternmost building up here, building 5. And then also creates the Market Plaza, which is framed by buildings 3 and 4, which really interacts intensely with the existing theater district and La Jolla Playhouse and other theater facilities that are down there, and creates kind of a new amenity anchor in the form of a market hall and other retail opportunities that serve as an attractor for not only students on campus, but for residents and visitors from all over San Diego and those that may be coming to theater performances. So it really becomes this self-reinforcing living and learning neighborhood, hence the name.
So what we did, if you remember the diagram of the ramble, we're calling it the ramble that goes through the center of the site, we then decided to figure how do we continue to make that a place of community and gathering and creating individual identities for the entrances to the residences. So in all cases, the residential entries enter out onto this ramble, which becomes the part of the site that is a little bit more private for the residential buildings, whereas the portions that are along Ridge Walk and the theater district become more community focused. So there's a nice opportunity to sort of both interact and pull away as needed. So at the base of each of the residential buildings, as you can see in the diagram here, the red dots become the sort of front doors or addresses to these residential buildings. And at each location, we've developed porches at the base of the buildings caused by overhang of the building above that then can be developed in a way that brings the scale of the building down, gives each building its own individual identity, and gives its opportunity for entrance into these buildings off of the ramble, which is the organizing sort of community aspect on the site. And also obviously the connection to nature that occurs in every motion that comes and goes as people come and go from the building. So each porch ended up kind of having its own theme. Some of them have hammocks hanging in them, fire pits, other sorts of ways for social and gatherings to occur and invite people up into that sort of front porch or in-between place between the full community areas of the building and the more private portions of the building, which are residential.
This was really fundamental to this idea of creating these nested senses of belonging. So by giving each of these front porches a really clear identity, it gives the students an opportunity that are living that building to kind of socialize in a semi-private space that belongs to their building, that clearly identifies them as sort of being part of that, but also to allow them to socialize in the sense of inviting others that are passing by on the ramble or friends to kind of come over and experience the unique qualities of their building. So there's a sort of an opportunity to share that way too.
So Matthew mentioned some of the outdoor rooms. In between each of these buildings, spaces between the buildings of varying sizes as the buildings sort of move back and forth across the site created different scales of outdoor spaces that have developed in ways that give students different sorts of opportunities, again, to be either alone or in groups. Scales of these spaces are different. The character of them are different because of the size of the buildings or the type of planting. Some are more active and used for activities such as running or outdoor activities. Some of them are actually used for more meditative uses.
I think this was one of the exciting aspects of the progressive design build process was, sort of rather than having a fully locked down program, it really allowed, the design team to kind of innovate and kind of tailor the program and make suggestions, to the university and, collaborate with them in its evolution that could really help reinforce these concepts around wellness. And so once these ideas got floated to, create a meditation pavilion, create a tea house, create these, smaller, more contemplative, spaces that can either be experienced directly or they're just kind of part of the background, the backdrop that students are circulating through, gave us an opportunity to really, push the conceptual aspects of the project to the highest possible level. And so this is an image of the meditation pavilion that, it's about 1,500 square feet, open air, unconditioned space. And it's been really designed in a way to kind of maximize the number of people that can use it simultaneously while still maintaining, sort of the privacy necessary for, effective meditation or contemplation, but also preserving, sort of security and making sure people have eyes on each other for safety. And all of this is then landed within what we call the bamboo forest that has a sort of circular walking path that meanders through that, through those bamboo elements. So even if one's not in there, specifically sitting and meditating in a more conventional fashion, just that sort of contemplative strolling and walk experience is its own, mindful process.
So this is an image looking down the Rammel. As you can see, the portions that are along the walkways are the dry creek bed that accommodate the runoff from the site. And also what you can see here illustrated are 3 of the front porches that open onto this shared outdoor natural amenity. So talking a little bit further on the ground plane, we were very focused on making sure that in creating connections to nature, that we were creating connections to nature that were actually comfortable, giving opportunity for these different types of activities that would be met by the human comfort needs needed in each of those type of activities. In situations where they were more contemplative and people weren't moving, they needed to be able to not be too cool or too warm. In other areas, they could be more open and in the sunlight. So what we did is we did, through computational fluid dynamics, several runs on air movement through the site, the wind as it comes off of the ocean, and then started to pair that with the location of plant materials on the site and studying the shade patterns of the different types of materials and locations of the plant materials so that we could make sure that we were creating the sorts of environments that we wanted to occur in each of these outdoor rooms. So these were studies that showed, that are just images from the studies that we used to study that as we look through the project. And then from an outcome standpoint, we had the opportunity then after it was all done to look at what was accomplished from the standpoint of reducing the amount of runoff. We are sort of happy to pronounce or to say that 100% of all of the runoff on the site will now be handled through natural filtration processes and will not be put into the sewer system or in any way affect the runoff that goes to the ocean. So that was really a great bit of, I don't know, we all felt really great about that outcome. So moving from the site then up under the building forms and into the facade design, we'll talk a little bit how that developed.
Yeah, so the overall building massing, as we have North Torrey Pines on the western edge of the campus and of our project site, and then Revelle College Drive, maybe a point to that, Tom, as it sort of turns into the campus and leads to the existing theater district. It was really important to the university and to the community that we reduce the building massing as much as we could on the western edge of the project site as it relates to the kind of residential neighborhoods on that side. It remains in keeping with some of the other existing high-rise residential buildings along that western edge. So you can see we worked to keep the massing low on that edge, and then allowed the building heights to come up more internal to campus into the taller portions of the project. And by really working to maximize the amount of ground plane, maximize the spacing in between the buildings, we've been able to drive as much sunlight as we can down into the into the sections of the project in between the buildings. And some of the other maneuvers we started to make then was looking at the 2 different building skins that make up the project. There's kind of what we see as the base skin, the kind of lower skin, and then there is the taller kind of tower skin. And I think if you go to the next slide, we can start to expand on the logics of those 2.
I want to say a couple of things before we move on from this side.
Go ahead, please.
We'll be mentioning this later, but you can see it really well here. This is the main entrance to the campus, and the gateway portion, or the gateway concept here, will become really important and was a signature desire of the chancellor to sort of treat this as an entry to the campus that was representative of the institution that it is. And because this is one of the entrances that is most activated by folks from the community going to the theater district, which is located here, and the historic grove of the eucalyptus trees. This became a signature opportunity for our project to marry across, as we mentioned before, but you can see it very nicely here, how this becomes sort of the community theater district that's a part of and integrated with the residential aspects of the project, which give the students an opportunity to interact with the community in a really helpful way. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's great, yeah. So as we started to look at the, you know, it's a metaphor to anchor the concept of the building skins. You can kind of see down here the, you know, the sort of brown arrows indicating the sort of lower base of the buildings, and we likened that to the cliffs of La Jolla as they come down and meet the water, and the type of erosion that is happening there, and the type of, you know, the rustification, if you will, that's made them like quite crunchy. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, like how that sort of, that texture and serration can really actually start to enhance the natural ventilation opportunities, especially for those lower portions of the buildings. And then we then looked at the tower skin and how that could then draw upon the actual North Torrey pine tree itself. And the nature of its growth patterns, and how we could represent the, you know, in a sort of tighter graining of the skin detailing at the lower elevations, and allowing that to branch up and out, as you can kind of see, is you know, occurs in that tree form itself, and how that could help reduce the perceived height and massing of these of the buildings, and really kind of anchor it conceptually to that natural biophilic form.
It's interesting to note that the species North Torrey pines is an endangered species, and it only exists in 2 places in the world, interestingly enough, one of them the La Jolla area. And it's, you know, specifically known for its hardy ability to resist the ocean climate and the winds and so forth. And so it's very beloved in the area as a tree. So the facades were developed further, again, using analytics to help us and help drive us toward the outcomes that the university was after. We wanted to take full advantage of the fact that because these are student residential buildings, they could be completely naturally ventilated if we could prove that the ventilation could occur in a way that performed, giving that the appropriate human comfort metrics as needed. So the building facades, especially in the lower portions, what we learned was that if we serrated the facades, we could create turbulence as the air moved along the facades. It would increase the amount of airflow into the residential areas by 30%. And interestingly enough, that from a brain health standpoint also translates into a 1.6% improved cognitive function. So we felt that in doing that, we worked with our sustainability engineers and their computational fluid dynamics to figure out what was the proper and the most effective angle of these serrations. And we married that additionally with the opportunity to further increase the views that would be possible to the ocean. The diagram down here shows the dynamic analytics that were done to understand the airflow into the spaces as a result of the serrated facade. And also the serrations proved that throughout the year, we fine-tuned them even further with overhangs and side shades and so forth, to make sure that we were getting the full benefit of them from a solar performance standpoint, both in protecting from sun. And so on one side of the buildings, we do have sunshades, and of course on the other side of the buildings we don't, but they become signature features, serrated and stepped in a way that start to reflect the nature of the craggy cliffs that you saw and were mentioned in the last slide. So from a performance standpoint, there are a lot of obviously different issues and things that we dealt with from a sustainability standpoint. We are version 4 targeting LEED Gold. What we determined was we are actually quite comfortably into gold. We have talked about pushing to platinum, but have decided that we want to focus some of our money in ways that benefit student learning outcomes and so forth, rather than shooting for LEED points. So we're trying to function or make our decisions in ways that keep the energy systems and the energy benefits high, but also the health and wellness benefits high. So we're balancing that out by spending some money on some of these other aspects that give students opportunities for better views, access to the exterior, daylighting, and all the other things that we've mentioned earlier. And this is this is a quiz for those coders of you in the audience. We noticed when we were practicing a little bit ago that something sort of unusual was happening here. But these are some of the statistics, and I will read them to you. That have resulted as a result of some of the analytics that we have taken into account. So we've 26,000 gallons of runoff have been avoided due to the bioswale development that we have in the Ramble. The energy service efficiencies have resulted in an average energy cost savings of more than 70% at this point, and we're still obviously driving those numbers down. We are targeting a PEUI of 18, which interesting, there's a story there. In the competition, we sort of aggressively suggested that we might be able to get there. The university was very excited and told us that they would hold us to it. And it looks like we're fortunately getting to the point where we're going to be able to do that. So that gives us reductions in energy use that are well within the 2030 commitment targets that we had. And that also it's well under the UC Systems target, quite a bit under actually what they've asked us to target from their sustainability plan. So we already mentioned the serrated facades have increased the amount of outside air into the residences by 30%. And those are some of the stats that the analytics have helped us to achieve.
So one of the founding concepts for the project, I mean, as any public project is at this point in time, is obviously there's budget challenges, and we're really striving to maximize value for the university. And working with Kitchell, our general contractor, partner in our design build team here, part of their group is an outfit in Phoenix called Capture, which is a prefabrication company that does a tremendous amount of prefabrication of skin systems for application on buildings like this. And so kind of from the get-go during the competition and then throughout the schematic and design development phases, we've really been working intensely with them to optimize the opportunities here to prefabricate pretty much the entirety of the building skins throughout the project. And so a lot of that thinking went into how do we optimize the components of the building in such a way that they can be built, consistently. However, how do we give enough variety to the project that it does not feel like that it's a prefabricated project? And so by coming up with this notion of as you see up here, the kind of the widget, and then by turning that into a module with some extended wing walls and then playing those against each other as they shift back and forth on the facade, we're able to give quite a bit of geometric variety to the building while really controlling the cost of the entire assembly and optimizing the speed of construction that's capable and minimizing the manpower that's required on site to erect this. So
it also gives us the contractor the ability, as you mentioned, to reduce the schedule of the construction process, but also the amount of traffic on site because of the amount of work that will be coming to the site already pre-assembled, which is an important issue on an operating campus like this when construction is occurring for the safety of the students and everyone using the adjacent properties.
Well, even from a construction safety standpoint, like by going to this system, we do not have to scaffold the building at all. We're able to completely erect all of these panel systems just purely by crane and eliminate the need for that scaffolding and the time and safety implications that come along with that.
Yeah, so interestingly, Kitchell has told us that there are in the range of over $8 million saved on the project as a result of this approach, and probably a month and a half of construction scheduling that has been reduced. They said that let's see if I can find it. Typically, if we were to erect a facade like this, say it was another material, a plaster or some other site installed material, it would have taken a team of 50 to 60 workers throughout the time of the project construction. But with the prefab, there will only be 5 to 6 people on site at any one time installing the exterior of the building. So it goes up in place completely finished. This gives you a little bit of a look from the west or east side of the site at the 2 taller towers. One of the things we like to talk about here is that early in the process, in order to find economy, but also to give benefit to the students in the university by increasing the amount of open space left on the site, not used for building area, we went through iteration of various unit types, unit mixes on the floors and so forth, and got to the point where we reduced the number of buildings on site by 1. And that allowed 109 square feet of open space per bed on this site, which is more than twice the amount of open space available on the next highest open space per person project on the campus. So we want to move a little bit onto the interior design. We already mentioned that the interior design is also, the interior designers are also within HKS and EYRC. So our teams have been working together, not only integrated with each other, but also with the architects on the project. So both the interior and the exterior came along in design and development at the same time. And the same concepts and approaches to the site and to the users was used, the exponential ecology.
Yeah, and so I think as we were developing the interior programs of the buildings and how those would relate to the exterior programs and really creating those, indoor, outdoor living opportunities, we continue to strive for that, for those ideas of exponential ecology, of creating these sort of virtuous cycles and figuring out like how does, something like, physical activity, how can we organize the building, the interiors in such a way to create opportunities for socialization? So as an example of that, and I'll maybe show you on a slide in a moment, like how do you locate the laundry rooms in such a way that it actually causes somebody who's, in their, laundry set of activities to actually have social interaction, to engage with people that are in a study activity. So in that sort of, it may be less convenient than having a laundry room on your, immediately on your floor, but it actually forces people into a socialization pattern. And so as much as we wanted to allow for people, opportunities to be alone, to contemplate, to kind of retreat from things, at the same time, we didn't want the building and the architecture to force, to kind of push an antisocial behavior either. So it was really finding the right balance between these things. And so I think go ahead, Tom.
Oh, sorry. Hard to do when you're not in the same room, right?
Yeah.
Well, we took advantage of some of the things we learned during research. You're mentioning a concept that's called functional inconvenience, which is the notion of doing things that aren't in the most convenient way, but they cause an inconvenience that has another benefit, such as getting students to be more social and run into other people. So this happens both in retail areas, it happens in academic areas, it happens in residential areas. So we were cognizant of finding those ways to get students to move and be in connection with. Hope you can't hear that, my phone's going on. Anyway, so those sorts of issues were kept in mind as we went through all of the programming of the interior spaces, the locations of them, adjacencies to other, and to the exterior. Sorry.
Yeah, and really drawing on that natural environment, again, to inspire the interior materials palette. So again, drawing on the La Jolla coastal cliffs and the really rich ochres that exist there, and then the existing historic grove of eucalyptus that's all over the UC San Diego campus, and looking at the the colors that come, the really vast range of earth tone colors that come out of that. We allowed that to start to inspire the interior color palette.
And even while mentioning,
and Tom, I think we do want to be. I think we do want to be conscious if we're trying to end by 4:45 for Q&A. Right. That's in about 5 minutes, so right. We'll hustle.
So keeping in mind some of the things we mentioned, we've all of the ground level planes are where most of the social activities have been located, with direct access to exterior, to the front porches, and creating some of those interaction possibilities that have been talked about. These are some images of how those spaces are sort of being developed, with a lot of flexibility, a lot of opportunity for different types of activity and different types of social interactions, as we mentioned. When you move up to the residential floors themselves have also been designed in ways that create social interaction, but also give opportunities for privacy, as we mentioned. So even the bending of the building reduces the apparent length of the corridor. There are always views at the end of each corridor, and in 3 locations on each floor, there are opportunities for social interaction. when people arrive on the elevators, they immediately get off the elevator into shared social great rooms, as we call them, which are two-story spaces that have a variety of social seating areas, as well as a shared kitchen, so that social activities can be enjoyed, but also people actually have to pass through them in order to get to their room, giving people another opportunity to meet new folks and make new relationships. These are some images of how those are starting to develop. Do you want to go on this with Matthew?
I'm waiting for the screen to catch up with the image here. I can't see which slide you're on yet.
Oh man, maybe you're tracking behind what I understood.
Yeah, there we go. Now I can see what you wanted me to talk about. Yeah, so the other aspect to the project is not just the student housing aspect, but it's also the community engagement aspect. So this image here kind of shows the location of the theater district over here on the right, and how we've created the new vehicular drop-off in the middle here, and how that kind of serves both the theater district and the Market Hall Plaza that we're creating there. But an important component of this, Tom mentioned this as we were looking at kind of one of the overall aerial renderings of the project, is the gateway aspect of how the project starts to have a presence on North Torrey Pines that communicates not only the presence of this world-class university here, but the excitement of the theater district beyond it. So we can go next. So in this image of the gateway here, what you're starting to see is the Revelle College Drive kind of going up through the middle here, and flanking on one side, on the left, is really prominent UC San Diego signage, and on the other side is a sculpture element that we've developed that we call the carbon clock. And Charles Keeling, who was who discovered the Keeling curves that really tracks the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, and really is the kind of foundation of climate change science. That research was done at UC San Diego. And so what this curve does is it sort of plays the predictions of the Keeling curve against the commitments of UC San Diego in terms of its reduction of carbon emissions. So one of which is represented by the brass staves, and the other is represented by the rising and then descending concrete element here, all played against the years. So it really kind of just puts in context to the urgency of climate action. So we can go next. Just trying to hustle along here.
So as we're entering the site, the interaction with the community was a very important issue, especially because they were theater patrons and patrons of the university as well. So parking, which happens underneath the entire site, or not the entire site, a good portion of the site, we wanted to make sure that the experience there was one of arrival to the project that wasn't very much an afterthought. So the coming and going places from the parking structure are in places that we call parking gardens. And so they give multi-story opportunities to leave the parking structure at the vertical circulation nodes through light wells and other ways to get up into the site on multiple levels by creating these parking gardens, which are multi-level landscape elements.
Next. And then the Market Hall itself is then kind of in the middle there of this nexus. And so the Market Hall is meant to be a bit of a food hall type element with a whole series of vendors curated from local vendors from that have been are operating these like sort of boutique food and beverage opportunities inside there that can really make for a really rich experience as somebody is coming on on the first time or the 10th time. They can have a really different experience within that setting. And you can see the materials palette and everything else really ties in with this idea of exponential ecology. Next.
So this retail plaza seemed not just an area of circulation, but it really becomes sort of the community center in a way. Opportunities for programming, outdoor events, especially in this climate. I think it'll become a very designed to be very flexible, but also give a variety of different opportunities for outdoor events and sort of signature placemaking opportunities. So the restaurants and retail are on one side, and the market hall that you mentioned a moment ago is on the other side, giving them sort of welcoming arms for this outdoor space.
So I think this kind of really wraps up the project in a way. Those two signature outcomes that we talked about, the health and wellness aspect and the connection to community aspect, really, coming together in the, sort of yin and yang of the project, that allows students to, socialize and connect with each other, connect with nature, and then also have the connection to the community fabric, and help activate this retail experience that's not just for the campus and for them, but brings in and really reinforces the university's anchored to the community through the theater district and the La Jolla Playhouse. So yeah, through outcome-driven design, we feel like we've established outcomes from the beginning, that we used research to develop design strategies, and we have a relationship with the university because of the prior project, North Torrey Pines, which is now finishing construction. We're already starting research there on ideas that were implemented in that location as to when the students move in, how they're panning out, and what things can be learned there that we can start to continue to move into and employ in further residential projects that the university will be doing. So we're happy to take some questions.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Matthew and Tom. This is a great project, and actually, as Evan shared with everybody, it must be a great place for anybody to go to college to. I mean, it sounds it's a very inspiring and conducive. And I think we have a first question here, but everybody can raise their hand, and of course also plug the question in the chat. And Daniel Frank, you have a question. Would you like to unmute yourself and just ask the question directly?
Yeah, I was just wondering what the program for the educational component of the project is. I know the other living learning neighborhoods have specific educational focuses, foci.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's about 30,000 square feet of academic program in the building, which is 450 seat lecture style classroom, a couple of 100-seat classrooms. There are a number of 50-seat classrooms. So it's not a massive academic program in here, but there is also the Office of the Provost that's associated with the Theater District Living and Learning neighborhood, and a number of support spaces for the academics of the Provost.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question from Nora. Nora, would you like to ask the question directly?
Yeah, I can ask the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm a UCSD theater MFA grad, so I spent a lot of time in that theater district, and I have to say I'm very jealous that this didn't exist when I was there, because it's beautiful. But second, I wanted to know if there are any, is there a planned addition to the Stewart collection for this campus, or have you thought about where an art piece could go, or is your carbon clock part of the Stewart collection?
Well, it's interesting. The Stewart collection, as I mentioned, we did the project that's under construction now prior to this, which is another 2,000-bed living and learning neighborhood. And there is a Stewart collection piece that has been incorporated into that project. It's a large two-dimensional piece. We're still, we haven't had specific conversations about that yet. There have been some conversations about the possibility of incorporating art into this project in a way also that would help with our outcomes. The opportunity to engage and view art is also something that is known scientifically to benefit brain health. So they're very interested in working with us in that regard.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We have a recommendation by Walter. Walter, would you like to just discuss it directly?
Yes, sure. Hi, I'm Walt Kanzler. I'm working with the team at UCSD. And just in terms of the Stewart collection, I think the carbon clock, even though it's designed as part of a monument to the entry, that might be really something that they can consider as a piece of art. And I don't know who gets to claim the name for that, but the team really, I think, did a very interesting collaboration to put that piece together. And it is more, you know, abstract and representational of art than an entry monument. And I think the other comment that I made is that the academic piece of the program helps to connect with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. So there's a big hill sloping down into La Jolla where Scripps is located, where the university first started. And, you know, they're short on classrooms. And so some of these larger classroom spaces, because the students only have, you know, 10 minutes to get from class to class, it will be very accessible to them, and it will just kind of extend their opportunity for academic space.
Hi, Walt.
Hey, Walt.
That's great. Thank you very much.
It's
Matthew,
always nice to have the client show up, right?
Yeah. Any more questions for Walt?
Yeah.
we can open up the conversation here. Matthew, you have something you would like to share. You have a question, if you don't mind taking the mic.
Yeah. In relation to the student housing, I noticed it was in the set of documents that was released that it mentioned that you guys were looking at tunable lighting for the dorm spaces. As a lighting control manufacturer, this is a new space that we haven't seen much of this talked about. What was your guys' thought behind this, and why did you guys try to go this route when looking at these dorm spaces?
We're still looking at that in more detail, but we're interested in, obviously, the fact that from a human health standpoint, again, and from a wellness standpoint, humans and their connectivity to light and daylight is really important, right? Whether it's daylight or natural light, and the ability to tune it appropriately for different moods, for different tasks, for different times of day or whatever is really important. So we're trying to consider ways that we can do some of that in a way that's appropriate for the budget that we have. But that's kind of the thinking behind that as a concept.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I don't see other questions in the chat. Anybody has other questions, you can just like raise your hand or take the mic and ask away directly. We have a few more minutes. And Matthew and Tom, any other, anything else you would like to add to this project that might kind of like anticipate some of the questions?
Well, I would just like to say thank you to Walter being here. This being at least my opportunity to work twice with the university on a project like this has been a dream come true. The university is a fantastic partner in regard to the things that the team is exploring and interested in understanding and when it comes to health and education. And their goals and their values around human health and advancing student outcomes are really, really up there and setting new bars with what they're learning and what they're trying from a sustainability standpoint and in the other ways that I've mentioned. So they've been a really fantastic partner with us in working to understand these things better and advance design in a way that these outcomes can be brought into bear.
I have a quick kind of follow-up to that, Tom, is I think that, you know, the evolution of the work that you did at North Torrey Pines and now here at the Theater District, just the recent research, and this is a whole other presentation, but the recent research that you're doing around COVID-19 and how the buildings can be used in such a way that allows for, you know, the current conditions that we all find ourselves in. I think it's really, it's pretty amazing. And I know it's kind of a teaser because there's really no time to talk about that. But I just want to, you know, thank you and the team for taking those extra steps and really studying that and understanding it and working with the provost and others on campus to kind of try to unlock some of those things. But the main thing about natural ventilation really allows for all the student residents to kind of be safe and have fresh air, and not a lot of local environments allow for that, you know. Yeah. So it is a unique opportunity in that way.
Yeah, it's really true. I think, you know, the fact that that campus has been designated basically a living lab and an opportunity to study, we've all gotten the sort of the ultimate petri dish put in front of us with this COVID situation, right? So using that campus as it's going to be opening up, it's a way of understanding how when you approach design from the standpoint of human health and wellness and the things that you incorporate into a community because of that do indeed help it flex into a pandemic situation much more easily. And so that is a study that's ongoing right now, and it's really interesting to consider how there's a payoff to doing that beyond just the other things that we already know about, right? This is something we couldn't have predicted.
Scott, do you have a question, a thought that you might want to say something? Okay. I have a question for you. Clearly, two firms working together. Which one, for each of you, what was the biggest challenge for this in working on this project? From your own standpoint.
Yeah.
You want to start, Matt?
Go ahead, Tom. Yeah.
This is who gets to talk first. That's the hard part.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think one thing that was great is I think natural synergy that our firms found together. So this isn't necessarily a challenge, but I think there was a synergy of thought and an approach. Certainly, in the melding of the minds between myself and Tom, and then some of our other the design leadership, like within our groups. So that was heartening. There's definitely some, from a challenges perspective, like some communication and file sharing kind of issues, like, we attempted to use Slack for a while to kind of get the two, offices kind of communicating in a more organic fashion early on, but it didn't really work out just because of the strata of different users and their connections to digital technology. And so it felt like, some of the more senior folks that weren't able to adapt to using that were missing out on like key decisions and pieces of decision making. And so as a result, we kind of had to scrap that and go back to a more conventional, sort of like email, correspondence for it. So, so that was a challenge. I'm trying to think of a challenge. That was a challenge. But we figured out how to make it work.
I think what I would say is, I think, even though there are people in our offices who know each other and have worked together before, we haven't yet partnered on a project like this. And to basically have to be able to hit the ground running in a competition setting that is designed over a 6-week period, Matthew, to demonstrate to a client how seamless your team operates together and how you could be a singular point of design solution to them. And operate like that immediately, right? It was amazing how the team pulled together and figured that out. But we got through the competition phase and then sort of took a breath and then realized there was still more work to do because we still had the rest of our marriage, right? And so there's a lot of effort that goes into building a culture among people who don't know each other and have to immediately work in a seamless way and make creative decisions and work in a way that brings innovation and results for the client. So that's been really hard, but it's also been really fun and has a great payoff to it.
Yeah, and the good thing was we had just enough time to really forge those relationships with tons and tons of in-person meetings together at our office, at HKS's office, at Kissel's office down in San Diego, in the client's offices, down at UC San Diego. And so we formed these really tight bonds such that when the pandemic hit and we all had to go into lockdown mode, those relationships and those direct personal relationships and the trust had already been, communication channels had all already been established. So the shutdown started basically right at the end of schematic design, and so the entirety of design development for this project, $500+ million project was completed by a team working completely by all over the country, completely from home. And quite honestly, it felt shockingly, seamless and not like a big burden. But I think it would have been much, much harder if we hadn't been able to forge those interpersonal relationships, prior to that. So, silver lining, yeah.
I think it's great when this kind of collaborations really work out and generate something really as interesting and beautiful as this. So the facility right now is unoccupied, I guess, right?
What did you
It's
say?
unbuilt.
Sorry,
It's a parking lot at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, unbuilt, got it. That's why we only saw the,
Yeah, the North Troy Pines neighborhood, the first of the two, is finishing construction this year. This one won't start construction until 2023. So we're just starting construction documents now.
Excellent.
Well, I think it'll start. It won't be open until 2023.
Oh, sorry.
It'll start. It'll start construction later this year. It's the plan.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah, Walt's like, ah.
Yeah. Oh wait, Walt. Sorry.
Right. Surprise. Yeah. No.
Okay. Any other question from the audience, from this group? Well, hearing none and being past 5, I'm sure everybody's either moving to drinks or to the next Zoom. So
Yeah.
Matthew and Tom, thank you so very much for this wonderful presentation. As mentioned before, we are recording this. We will make the recording available for everybody to just like review it. And again, thank you very much for sharing this great project with us. And have a great evening and take good care and stay safe.
Very good.
Carlo.
Good to see everyone.
Thank you.